Alright guys, so now we're ready to implement Redux. So there's some boilerplate we have to do to create what's called a store, a Redux store. Now if we go to the Redux DevTools in Chrome, we're going to get a message that says no store found, follow these instructions. And basically if you want to use the Redux DevTools, you have to implement them within your store, and this shows you how to do that. Now we're not going to use this exact syntax because we installed the package, the Redux DevTools extension package, so it'll be a little nicer than this. So I just wanted to show you that this is not going to work unless you actually create a store. So let's go ahead and do that. Inside of our source, client source folder, I'm going to create a file here called store.js. All right, and this is basically just boilerplate. A lot of the store files you're going to see are going to look very similar. You just basically need to bring in a function called create store, and you need to run that, and you need to pass some things into it. Okay, so let's go ahead and import create store. And we're also going to be using Thunk, which is middleware, so we want to bring in apply middleware. Okay, and this is going to be from Redux. Next thing we want to bring in is something called compose with DevTools. Okay, and that's going to come from that Redux DevTools extension package that we installed. So Redux DevTools extension. We also want to bring in Thunk, which is our middleware. So let's say import Thunk from Redux-Thunk. And then we also need to import what's called a root reducer. Okay, so we're going to have multiple reducers, one for auth, one for profile, alert, so on. But we're going to combine them in a root reducer, and that's what we're going to bring in here. Okay, and that's going to be inside of a folder called reducers, and we're going to call it index.js. So since we call it index.js, we can simply just say from reducers like that. All right, in fact, I'll go ahead and create inside source. I'm going to create a folder called reducers, and inside that I'm going to create a file called index.js. So that's our root reducer, and I'll add the code to that in a minute. So that's it for the imports. Now we need to create a variable called initial state, which is just going to be an empty object. Okay, all of our initial state will be in the reducers, and then we're going to create a variable called middleware and set that to an array. And the only middleware we have is Thunk. Okay. Now here's where we actually create the store. So we're going to create a variable called store, set that to create store, which we brought in from Redux. And this is going to take in, first of all, the root reducer. It's the first thing it takes. And then the initial state. And then any middleware. Now, since we're using the DevTools extension, we can actually use that compose with DevTools, and then that takes in the apply middleware. And inside apply middleware, we just use the spread operator and add that middleware variable that we created. So I'll save that, and that's pretty much it. Now we just need to export default store, and that's it. We don't have to touch this ever again. Now, in order for us to be able to use this store, we have to go to our app.js file here, which is our main app component, and we have to bring in two things. So I'm just going to put a comment here. It says, just so we know that this stuff has to do with Redux. So we need a provider. Okay, so in curly braces, we're going to say provider, and that actually comes from the React Redux package. So we want React-Redux. And that's what actually connects the two, because Redux is a separate, it's separate from React, but this will combine them together, and we can do that by surrounding our entire app inside with this provider. Okay, we also need to bring in the store, so we want to import store from, I don't know why I keep using an equal sign. So import store from, and then just ./store, which is the file we just created. Now, in order to use this provider, we need to wrap everything in provider, just like we did with the router. Okay, that way all the components that we create can access our state, our app level state. Now this provider, we need to actually pass in the store. So we'll say store equals and then pass in our store. Okay, so I'll save that. I'm just going to check out the terminal, so no errors here. Now we need to add to our index.js, which is in the reducers folder. So this is our root reducer. And the idea here is we're going to have multiple reducers, but we're going to bring in something called combine reducers. So combine reducers, and that's going to be from Redux. Okay, and then all we have to do is export a default combine reducers, and then this just takes in an object that will have any reducers we create. So for instance, we'll create an auth reducer here, and we'll just bring that in and add it here. All right, but I'm just going to save this as is, just an empty object. But just by doing this, if I go back to our application, you can see that the dev tools are now working because we have a store. We don't have any reducers or state. In fact, if we look at state, there's nothing down here. But the dev tools, I can't say enough good things about. I couldn't imagine doing anything with Redux without them, because they show your entire app level state. They show any action that's fired off. So if we load a user or register, login, anything like that, it's going to show us the actions here, and it'll show us the state diff. So basically, if something changes in the state, it shows you exactly what changes, shows you the trace. You can run tests, so just testing, actions. So all that stuff shows here, and it makes it really not easy, but easier to understand exactly how Redux works and what it does for us. All right, so that'll become more clear as we move along. But now that we have a store set up, in the next video, I want to create one of our reducers, and I think what we should do first is the alert reducer, since it's pretty simple. We just have a set alert and remove alert. Okay, and what I mean by alert is just like how Bootstrap has those red and green alerts. I want to be able to just call those whenever we want from wherever we want. So I'm going to put that in the state. All right, so we'll continue in the next video.